All right. So if this is your first time attending a Wayside Women's Wellness Echo, welcome. And I'm going to share a little bit about Project Echo and Wayside Recovery Center. First off, Wayside Recovery Center, if you're unfamiliar with us, we are a substance use disorder treatment program in Minnesota, and we provide mental health and addiction treatment services for women, children, and families. Shout out to our Wayside folks who are joining at our different locations right now. Welcome to you all. And then the ECHO part of this is Project ECHO, which stands for Extension for Community Healthcare Outcomes. And it's a movement to demonopolize knowledge and amplify the capacity to provide best practice care. So together, the Wayside Women's Wellness ECHO is 1 hour long at noon each month. So it's oftentimes over many people's lunch hour and really meant to be sort of a lunch and learn style series with the goal of sharing best practices and support service information, which will hopefully enable participating organizations to empower all people in recovery, empower women and families to break the cycle of addiction and trauma. My name is Zora Darkhourt. I'm the Director of Training at Wayside Recovery Center. And today our ECHO session is entitled Inside ACE. Our speaker for the day is Karen Johnson, and I'm going to share a little bit of information about Karen. Karen Johnson has been a TVR counselor with vocational rehabilitation for Native Americans since 2018. She has over 20 years of experience working with victims and survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, rape and incest, and substance use disorder. Karen works closely with On Da Ing Halfway House, St. Croix Chippewa Tribal Recovery and Reintegration for Justice-Involved Individuals, Building Communities of Recovery, and St. Croix Chippewa Tribal Education. So we're very happy to have you here with us today, Karen. I welcome you, and I will pass things over to you.
Okay, let's go back to share screen, or should we do the, I guess we should do the polls first.
Oh, for sure.
But first, what I'd like to do is land acknowledgement. I am here at Round Lake Community Center at the St. Croix Chippewa Tribal Nation, and it is their past, present, and future lands. They were called the Lost Tribe for some time because they weren't allowed to. They weren't at the right place at the right time to sign for being on reservation. So in 1932, they were finally allowed reservation status of the lands that they had been on for thousands of years. And it's my pleasure and my honor to serve the community. I'm not tribal myself, but I am a ally and a co-conspirator in all things that are good. There is no word for disability in Ojibwe. There are only words for hope and healing and gifts. And when I think about my program, vocational rehabilitation for Native Americans, working with tribal members with disabilities, that's what I think of. And I know that many of you do the same in whatever way you are engaging. So bonjour to those who are here that are tribal. And I'm so happy that you're all here today. We were going to first start with the Adverse Childhood Experiences poll to figure out where you all are. Have you had it, or are you familiar with ACEs? And the poll is up. And did they just click on their choice?
So I will open up the first poll, and the first polling question is, are you familiar with ACEs? So let me relaunch the poll, and you should see it just in a second. Does everybody see that poll there? Yes, I'm seeing results coming in. Okay, so we'll give it a couple of seconds here for people to answer, and then I will share the results of that. All right, I'm gonna end poll here. Can everyone see the results? Thumbs up, if you can. Okay.
So we have some mixed experience, so that's really good. And this helps me sort of decide what information I need to give everyone so that we're meeting everybody's needs for education today.
Karen, would you like me to launch the ACE study poll as well?
Are you able to do that on your end? Yeah, sure, that's great.
So I just had two other ones. This one is, are you familiar with the ACE study specifically? Give that a few seconds. All right. Everyone can see the results of that one. Okay. So it looks like most people said I have heard of it, but don't know much.
Okay.
And then the last one was around if you've actually taken the ACE questionnaire. So I'll launch that as well. Oh, it will let me. Oh. Well, that one's not letting me do it. So let me try one more time.
Well, we can kind of get an idea from what we're seeing here, who might have taken it and who might not have. So it doesn't, we don't have to go that direction.
Sounds good.
Are you able to launch or do you need me to?
Oh, it wasn't letting me launch that last one. So
Okay.
I'd like to try or.
All right. So we're going to get started and we will have some time at the end of the program for questions. And I also want people to understand that as we talk about this today, for those of you that aren't experienced with it, it may be triggering. And so if we need to stay on a little while after we close the program and chat, we can do that. So you should know that if you need to step out, if you just realize something about yourself while we're talking about this, that's okay and it's normal. And we're here to help you if you feel traumatized. So adverse childhood experiences and building self-healing communities. This is really about all of us who are working in any field being able to understand what we're seeing in front of us and changing the future because we understand what is happening, that it is not what is wrong with people, it is what happened to people. And I think we've probably all been in that place in our lives where we've put our head in our hands and we've just said, what is wrong with me? And now when that happens, I bet many of you are able to say, I know it's not what's wrong, it's what happened. And you're able to breathe and kind of forgive yourself and move forward. And that's what we hope for everyone. Our experiences are stored in our bodies. And we see this beautiful, nurturing picture in front of us of a father with a child being held tenderly. But what if this isn't real? What if this is just a picture of a moment in time? And the rest of the time, when the photographer is not there, there is no real relationship. There's just violence and abuse. So what we see is not always what we get. And with ACEs, it helps us kind of pass through the layers, so we have a better understanding of what has happened to children and why, as we get older, we do what we do. With ACEs, we have an understanding of the human nervous system and how everything works together from our brain to our brainstem down our spine, and how all our nervous systems work together. And that the memory that our bodies hold um, starts in the womb. If you are a woman experiencing domestic violence and are living in a high stress situation, then the neural network that's being built in your child's brain is also high stress. So you might find that a child that has experienced domestic violence in the womb is going to come out at a higher stress level. There may be failure to thrive. There are different things that can be happening even that early. And, it did start out as this kind of experience. Dr. Folletti, who started this program or this study, he was with Kaiser Permanente in California, and he was doing a weight loss program, and he saw that his clients, his patients, were losing a great deal of weight, um, but they would drop out of the program or they would gain it all back, and he couldn't understand why. Why were they successful? And why couldn't they maintain that success? And he finally did something that a lot of people forget to do. He asked the patient what was going on. And one of the patients said to him that she was a victim of incest, and that whenever she lost weight, men would behave differently towards her, and she could not manage it. And so she would gain the weight back. And this is not to say all people that are of size are victims of incest or rape, but it started to get him to understand that childhood sexual abuse had an outcome. And with ACEs, there is a dosage. So the more ACEs, the higher dose of trauma, and the more difficulties one might experience in life. So what's happening is our biology is collides with our social expectations.
Sure.
So what you see sometimes is not what is really happening, and that is what the ACE study is about. Imagine that. And I remember myself before I was working in case management in Florida, working during the heroin epidemic in Manatee County, and we were basically we had busloads of kids that we were taking into service over the weekends because parents were dying. There was lots of overdosing, lots of criminal behavior, and that was when I first started hearing about the ACE study and looking at the experiences the kids I was working with had, but not just their experiences with their parents who had in the ACE questionnaire, perhaps witnessed gun violence, perhaps had been a victim of sexual abuse, had been a victim of battery as a child, had watched their parent be battered as a child, had lost their parent through divorce or other circumstances. And so there are these questions that started arising that Dr. Folletti started creating. And he did this along with another doctor, Robert Anda. And so together they created this initial questionnaire. foster care is another issue that can create a trauma. And so all of these occurrences of trauma, which is part of the ACE study, they have impacts on. So right now, if you're a child in Ukraine and you've been taken away from your family, or your parents have been killed and you're an orphan now, imagine what that's going to look like for them as they grow older, and the kind of trauma that is building in them. And that's like domestic violence on a really big scale. But there are international ACE programs now to address war based on the same kinds of experiences. So these are the adverse childhood experiences that are common. Household dysfunction that includes substance abuse. One of the questions I would now ask would be, did you lose someone to COVID? Were you isolated from COVID? Because this is now an issue that kids are deal with as they get older. How are they going to feel when they turn 14 and they were in isolation because of COVID, and then their child turns 14? How is that going to impact their relationship with their child? And how is the child going to be impacted by that trauma that their parents had? So we look also at mental illness in parents, battered mothers, fathers, others, criminal behavior, neglect, and abuse, physical, sexual, and emotional. And if the questionnaire comes out and these questions are asked, were you in a household that there was substance abuse? Was there a parental divorce or separation? It's interesting to me that they don't ask about death, because my father died when I was 4, and I know that had an impact and continues to have an impact on me. Sometimes when I am triggered, I find myself like Alice in Wonderland, being very small and the world growing around me. And I think, well, I wonder what this is that's triggering me today, because I was so small when he died. I'm not really sure what the trigger is. But as an adult, I recognize it, and I'm able to say to that little child spirit, it's going to be okay. I got this. You don't have to be responsible for this. Karen has this for you. And the ability to be able to understand how our ACEs impact our lives and how they impact our behaviors and how they impact our health becomes one of the most important things that we can do for ourselves and share with our clients or our consumers or our family members, because we can change the face of public health by recognizing the dose response relationship and health problems. Now, I do want to make clear, and one of the things that we've talked about and that Dr. Folletti has talked about, is that this is not empirical scientific evidence. It is more of, we find that this can make a difference, but the outcomes are not predetermined. Just because you have 4 ACEs or more, or 1 ACE or more, does not mean that you are going to have a chronic heart condition. It does not mean that you're going to have chronic depression or chronic anxiety. A lot of it has to do with how the trauma got managed. Someone can have one trauma that overwhelms them for the rest of their life. Another person can have 7 or 8 traumas, and they are in the right circumstances with the right set of parents or family members, and they process through it. So you have to remember that just because an ACE happened, it does not mean that the outcome is predetermined. It does not mean that that is a sentence. And so we have to remember the resiliency in this, that there is a huge amount of resiliency as people work with people like us. If we understand what has happened, and you don't even have to go through the ACE the ACE test. In fact, it may be wiser not to. You just let people talk, and they will tell you, if you listen, exactly what happened to them as children. And you will be able to then indicate that their ACE score would be whatever it is. And that for those of you who are kind of counting up your ACE scores now, who recognize that the traumas that you have experienced have impacted your life, be aware that your outcome is not predetermined, that once you can name it, you can change it. Once you know it, you can start to functionally manage it. I used to call it issues that had lots of tissues. And before the ACEs study, when I was working in battered women's shelters, I would talk to women who would say that the abuse started when they were 6 and their child was turning 6 and they did not know how to hold their child, that it made them so uncomfortable, they were pushing their child away. I had one woman talk to me about how her twin daughters both got their periods. And when she got her period is when the sexual assault started in her home. And she did not want to transfer that trauma and negative emotion about a beautiful, life-giving function. And we talked about what would it mean to be different for them. And we talked about how in a lot of tribes there would be a celebration of adulthood, moving into becoming a woman. And I said, and that could mean whatever it needs to mean to you. It can be going to the Dairy Queen. It can be creating a new tradition. And so she decided to take the kids to the Dairy Queen. And she called me back and told me that it had changed her perspective and that it was very healing for her. So never doubt that the information you give people can really create a change. You open the door, and if they can walk through it, they can self-determine what can happen in the future. So it's almost like, in a way, we look at this ACE scores in liver disease. So if you have 4 or more, your chances of having liver disease, as you can see, rises. But what if you know you have ACE scores at an early age? Are you able to manage that better? Because we can't forget liver disease is also attached to a lot of other issues like AODA, like alcohol. So one of the things that Dr. Folletti, I don't think that it's clear enough that we all talk about like pot is a gateway drug or alcohol is a gateway drug, but sugar is really a gateway drug. And for little kids who are trying to manage their emotions through food, that's the gateway to many other things, to many other substances. And I don't know that we haven't fully made those connections. Then this is me personally looking at this, because as I've seen and worked with people who are misusing substances, I see that equation with food and their relationships with food. So we have high ACE scores in population, which creates risk to multiple health and social problems. If we look at the mass shootings, if we look at that individual's actions, what do we know about their childhoods? And if we don't know that, we need to start figuring it out. There's also the intergenerational transmission. The Native American peoples I have worked with believe that they are impacted 7 generations, that there is a transfer of the trauma. And it's not just about a family member's behavior towards the next generation, but with studies, we've also learned about epigenetics. And epigenetics is a change in the proteins around the DNA. And there is some studies that are going on that are showing that there is this dose thing happening. So if your grandparents, and there was a study in Holland where the grandparents were forced to eat tulips because that's what they had to eat, and that their children and grandchildren then have a risk of obesity because the gene turned on that said we're starving, so we need to figure out what we can do to stop that. So our bodies produce different chemicals. They produce the serotonin levels change. And so we know that there is this connection, but we don't have empirical proof yet. That is something that we're working with, but I'm not a scientist. I don't pretend to be one. I just like to read. And I see this with Native American populations not being able to have food sovereignty. And that when we talk about community gardens and we reintroduce Three Sisters, we are able to then change the face of diabetes and other diseases by eating a traditional diet. So if you look at this population, you can see this map and all these different conditions that are possible. And look at the suicide rate. We have a real public health problem that can be attributed to the things that happen to us when we are younger and the things that happen to us because of the choices we make because of what happened to us, not because of what is wrong with us. Sorry, this. All right. So we talk about protective services for ourselves. One of the things that can happen with a child that has a lot of adversity is that in order to be safe, they start looking around for the signs and symbols from other people. It's it's the bear in the woods story, and I'm sure a lot of us in Wisconsin have encountered bears in the woods or coyotes, and we're told to scream and run, and that brings out the flight response. But what if the bear comes home and the bear is there and comes home every night? You can't escape it. You can't fight it. And so you end up numbing out. You end up disassociating. You end up creating a system for yourself that is not an internal protective core, but responds to those around you, sort of like a tennis ball being batted back and forth over a line or over a boundary that you're not even sure where it existed. And so when we look at these things, we recognize that culture cures. And one of the things that we're able to do in our program with vocational rehab for Native Americans is called Traditional Native American Services. And this program allows my consumers to engage in traditional practices, whether it be regalia, beading, medicine, gardening, things that are going to connect them to their culture, to their spirituality. And we find that this is suicide prevention. Our program, though our name is not Verna Suicide Prevention, it really is about that in the end too. And it is about changing and healing lives. And then this change, really is up to us. It's about the thoughts that we have and the conversations that we have in our communities, the courageous conversations that we have with compassion and care that can change the face of our relationships with our neighbors, and with the other communities around us. And I think that the other thing that we need to talk about when we're talking about this is when a child has to dissociate to survive, they may become a really good firefighter, police officer, psychologist, therapist, and crisis interventionist, because people who can disassociate are really good at being calm and cold in a crisis. But there isn't any way to see that what is happening at home with that person risk in suicide, higher risks and post-traumatic stress disorder from the work they do, higher incidence of violence. So though we can say, well, there are some rewards for this, what we're all still trying to do is figure out how to be balanced individuals and how to help the people that we are working with, how to support them to change from not what is wrong with me, but what happened to me. There's a story about a mother who gives birth in a hospital, and the nurses are very upset because the mother's not responding to the baby. She's not picking her up to feed her. She's not responding to her when she cries. And they report her to a social worker. And the social worker talks to the mom and finds out that the mom was adopted. She had been taken from her parents because when she was 2.5, she weighed what a 1-year-old would weigh. So no one heard her cries. No one reached out to her. No one nurtured her. And when she had her own child, she did not know what the crying was about. There was no cord in her that said, if my baby cries, it means something's wrong. If my baby cries, it means maybe the baby's hungry. And the social worker worked with the mother. She could not overcome that dose, but she could do a built-in timer. So the mother would set alarms for when the baby should normally eat. So there were compensations for the deficits that the mother carried from adverse childhood experiences that broke the mold. So she might not have been able to feel, but she could learn. And so this is about all of us continuing to learn to respond to that baby that's crying inside and in the world around us. Thank you for listening to me. And I'm not sure what time it is, but I'm sure we have lots of time for questions. So.
Yes, thank you. And I will actually stop recording now.